Hey everybody, it's EJ from iDesign.com, and today we are going to play around with umbrellas. And we're not going to open them inside because it's bad luck, but we can open them inside of Cinema 4D, and I think we're okay. But basically, I was very excited to actually figure out a way to make an umbrella open up and animate it opening up and closing using Mospline. It's the first time I figured out a good way to use Mospline. So let's kind of break down how I figured out how to do this. So let's just jump into Cinema 4D, and here is the finished version unanimated. But you can see I used a combination of Mospline, Loft, and just simply a cloner to create this. So let's go ahead. Let's delete all this stuff. Start from new. And the first thing we'll need to do is we'll create that capsule for our umbrella or parasol, whatever you want to call it. And then we're going to use some Mosplines with a loft NURB to actually create the little sections of our umbrella and model our umbrella. So the first thing we want to do, and the Mospline, the way I figured it out is, when you make an umbrella, you need it to like kind of bend and close, and I figured that the Mospline was perfect for that because it's a spline that you can bend and curve and stuff like that. So once I was playing around with this stuff, I'm like, this is pretty much, like what an umbrella does, where you can kind of mess around with stuff. There's like a portion of our umbrella, and you can bend it, and you can adjust the curve. This is like a curve from this direction, but basically Mospline at the very basic is a spline that you can curve and bend and kind of manipulate the way you would want to. So let's start building our little portions, or like the cage or the spine of our umbrella. So the first thing we're going to do is adjust the length here. So maybe like 250. We're going to move this up. And let's see. Let's kind of bend this down. That's what we'll want. And you can see that we have this. This is just like a visual here. But let's actually go to our object here. And we don't want to see the full shape. Let's just use a line or a spline to visually see what we're doing with our Mospline. And for this, I'm just going to just have the end a little bit shorter. Let's adjust this. Maybe go negative here. So maybe let's model it completely open. We'll need to bend it a little bit, and then what I'm going to do is create another one. And what I'm going to do with this one is bend this 45 degrees. So let's just go down here and get negative 45. So that'll be one portion, and then in the middle, actually, let me get my loft NURB here first so you can see what we're doing. So let's get our loft. We'll place our Mosplines in here, and you can see that I modeled a section. You know that an umbrella has that little arc section in the middle here, so we need to create that. So I have my first spline and my second spline. I'll need a spline in the middle, and since I need to place this halfway in between, or right in the middle of the two that I already made, I basically just need to divide this by 2, or 22.5. And you'll see I have my center section here. And basically all I need to do is kind of make this end portion shorter. You can see I have this nice arc now. And this is just going to be a section, just one part of my little umbrella. So you can get a little creative with this, and you can see that it's even bulging a little. So you might need to kind of bend this in ever so slightly, maybe. Or maybe you do want that to kind of have a little bulge if you want. but usually they kind of cave in a little bit. If you picture an umbrella, since it's this piece of cloth that's being tightened with the two metal pieces, it's going to be a little bit tight or kind of bent in or bowing in a tiny bit. So just subtly, you can see it's just very subtle how it bowed in just a little bit. So there's that. And maybe and just the angle and the bend. Kind of get it to how you want it. But I think subtle goes a long way. And again, you can adjust how much of an arc you want on your little piece here. So now we have one piece of our object, or of our umbrella. So I can duplicate this, and I can give these two different colors. So if I want my umbrella to be red and white, I can just make two and put red on one and white or cream material on the other. And then we just basically clone these guys. And we'll make this cloned in the radial mode. We'll turn off the radius, or we'll bring down the radius. We'll crank this up to 8, and we need to do a little bit of transformation here. So 90. And we also need to actually rotate this all the way up like so. And here we go. We have our little umbrella. So now, since we used most splines to create this, we can now animate like the bend and stuff like this. So now we can animate this to be closed. So if this is the open position, which we have right here, we can animate this to be closed. So you can actually animate this by hand if you want to, and selecting each of these and setting keyframes for all this stuff and adjusting all this. But what I'd like to do is not worrying about keyframing all these individual things. What I want to do is let me just start renaming stuff here. Umbrella pieces. So this is piece 1. This is piece 2. All right, so I'm just going to place all this stuff. I'm going to group it all together. This will be the umbrella group. And what I'm going to do now is get a pose morph tag. Now, pose morph tag basically stores states of objects. So if you save a state, make some edits, you can actually morph between those two states. So what I'm going to do is choose which attributes I want to store. And I'm just going to, you always want to do more than you really need. So, points, parameters is going to be the big one, just because it's going to be the parameters mostly of the most splines here. User data, I don't think we need, but again, better safe than sorry. And hierarchy is definitely one we're going to need, because we want to record everything in our hierarchy, in our object hierarchy here. So, with all that set up, we're going to go to our tag, and this is going to be our base pose, the open pose. And then it automatically creates a second pose that we can animate into. So this will be our closed pose. And what we can do now is, so these are all the little like structural, this is where like the metal pieces, the metal spine of our metal cage or ribs, or what, I don't know what the heck you would call it on the umbrella, but the metal pieces that are holding that cloth together of the umbrella. We can start manipulating this and kind of closing this in, and you can adjust the angle if you'd like. So what we're going to need to do is probably not bend so much, but going to angle this down. And we're probably not going to want too much of a bend, but angle this down, and we'll do the same for that middle piece, or the piece that's kind of making that arced section that's not being held by that metal piece. So we'll probably not want to bend that much either, and we'll bring this down. And you can already see that that looks, hey, Look at that. That looks like a closed umbrella. But again, if you think about how a closed umbrella is, this is going to be loose cloth now. So it's not going to be very tight. So you can kind of make this a little more bent if you would like. So you can do that. Another thing is that this looks kind of weird at the top. I'm not sure if we can fix that by doing this somehow. Yeah, so if we make the start position down, we lose that. I don't know if there's really too much of a way we can get around that, but that kind of helps if we adjust the start. But I think I might just want to leave it because I feel like a real umbrella would have that kind of bunching up at the top anyways. So we made all of our adjustments here. You can see that if we go in here, I mean, if you want to get close enough, you can see some of the chunkiness here, and we can adjust that by adjusting the mesh subdivision V here, and that'll just kind of smooth everything out if we really need to. But since we're kind of far out, dude, we're really not going to see that, so we don't really have to worry about that. But if you were, and you were making a bigger object or something, you need to smooth out that stuff, you play around with the mesh subdivision V. So we have our closed pose, and if we just adjust the strength of this pose, you can see that we're animating from open to pose, or from open to close. Pose, close, rhymes. But you can see right there that that's what's going on. So maybe, we want, maybe when it's closed, we want this to be even longer. So we can kind of embellish here and make these objects end a little bit further to the bottom here. Same with these. Let me just make it longer. Yeah, let's see how that looks. Boop, boop. So what we can do now is just kind of prepare for maybe a little bit of follow-through animation. So if you want to make this more kind of cartoonish looking, if you see in my original piece where it opens up and it kind of flattens a little bit, see right there, a little follow-through kind of stuff, or overshoot, sorry. It'd be follow-through if it kind of bent upwards again. So we can actually set that pose as well. So let's go and just create a new pose, and this can kind of be the overshoot pose. And the thing we can do with this is we can adjust some of the angles. So we can move this up. We can also adjust some of the bend. So maybe have this bent upwards a little bit. And then we can do the same thing with our kind of the rib pieces or the spine pieces of the umbrella, and adjust these up and maybe adjust the bend a little bit too. So now let's see how that looks. So you can really see that these are the pieces that have that spine, that metal piece in them. So actually, let's maybe straighten these out a little bit more. You can see in my original that the umbrella kind of flattens out a little bit. So let's do that. Oh, let's get all these metal pieces and just flatten them out, and then bring them in. And the same thing with the middle pieces. And adjust this so it's a little bit less bend. There we go. So that looks pretty flat to me. So now all it is a case of just animating these poses. So we got our open, our closed, and our little overshoot bit. So now all I'll do is just reset these sliders. And what I'll need to do first is just start from that closed pose. So I'm going to have the closed pose set to 100%. Go to frame 0 and set a keyframe. Maybe go to frame 10 and close this. And this is where we're going to start our overshoot. And maybe the overshoot takes about 5 frames, and create our overshoot there. And then we'll need to bring this back down to 0. So let's actually go into our timeline and see what the heck we just did there. Let me bring this over. Okay, so here's our timeline. We can hit play. Let me zoom out here. Let me hit play and see what this looks like. So you can see this isn't really timed out at much at all. So let me bring down our composition to 25 frames. And you can see that our overshoot needs to do a little bit of overlapping here. So now we have a little bit of that follow through or the overshoot happening of our umbrella. And it's all done with a couple poses of the Mow splines here. So we can get in here and really try to tighten this up with adjusting these keyframes here. So actually with the open pose, we kind of don't want any ease in really. We want this to kind of snap open. So maybe this happens even faster. And that means this portion of the overshoot or the follow through of those little spines, the metal pieces of the Mow spline, kind of snap a little bit too. So maybe we don't want too much of this ease here. Need to bring this ease down a little bit. Getting close. Getting close. Try to time this out so it looks good. So we want it to snap. Umbrella snaps open. Poof. Poof. And we can get this really extra cartoony if we just kind of change the spacing or the timing of these pieces here, these keyframes, and adjust the spacing. That feels much better. That feels more better. And that's it. So we have our close pose strength animated, easing in, and we have our overshoot pose that is animating here a little bit. And remember, you can always kind of overshoot this original pose too. So if you want it to flail open a little bit more, you can see I have a negative pose value in here of -58. So I can change that to, if I go to my key value here on this keyframe, maybe that's a little bit too much. Maybe we just want to do a -30. You can see that that kind of spreads open the umbrella a little bit more and kind of adds to that overshoot strength of the Mow splines bending, the bend strength not bending so much. That feels, I don't know if that feels better or not. Maybe just make it -10. -10. It just kind of flails out a little bit more, and that feels good. So now we have our opening umbrella. So this was done with just some loft NURBS, lofting some Mow splines, and you can see as the pose morph is playing through, you can see these values of all my Mow splines moving as it's morphing from one state to the other. So that is it. If you have any questions, be sure to post them in the comment section. I have other tutorials on pose morph. If you want to learn a little bit more about pose morph and how I used it to morph through different objects, I'll post that in the tutorial post as well. But that's it. That's my creative use for the Mow spline, and the only reason, that's the only way I've found a use for the Mow spline. But you know, I'd also like to hear if you've found any cool uses for Mow spline, because I know they can do a lot of things. Oh, one other thing I forgot is a really cool thing is the Mow spline, you can actually use particle forces. So say you wanted to do some kind of add some wind, you can have wind affect the umbrella. So it's actually affecting these Mow splines. So if we add some turbulence here, maybe some turbulence frequency, and we gave this a little bit more time. So this is like, you know, I really should find more uses for Mow spline because this is pretty cool. But again, this is, you probably wouldn't want all the wind on on all these Mow splines. Basically, you would just want the wind to affect the middle pieces here, not the pieces that will be connected to that metal spine part. So we can say for these ones, exclude that wind deformer, and then you'll now only have the wind affecting those middle pieces. And now you kind of have to do some adjustment here. So maybe that wind's a little bit too much. And it's very subtle, but you can see it. And then we can angle the wind up, and now you can really see it doing its magic, doing its wind thing. But yeah, have a play with that. And that's just a fun thing that you can do with MoSpline, as well as using effectors. So you can use particle forces and effectors on it. So a lot of uses for the MoSpline, but this is, I need to figure out more ways to use this because it can be super useful. I just need to dig into it more. But yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, if you have any questions, post them in the comments. If you have any uses for MoSpline that you've come up with, would love to hear that. And that's it. So thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye, everybody.